There is a question empaths ask themselves late at night. Not out loud, not to friends, not even to therapists. A quiet question that carries shame, confusion, and exhaustion. Why did I stay, even when I knew? Why did I stay after the red flags? Why did I stay after the apologies stopped meaning anything? Why did I stay after my body knew, before my mind admitted it? This isn't a question about intelligence. It isn't about weakness. And it isn't about love in the way we've been taught to define it. According to Carl Jung, empaths don't stay too long because they are naive. They stay because something ancient is operating beneath consciousness. And once you see it, truly see it, you stop blaming yourself. You don't harden. You don't shut down. You integrate. Number 1. Empathy is not the reason, the deeper truth. Most explanations are too shallow. They say empaths stay because they are too kind, because they see the good, because they don't want to give up. But Jung would say those are surface stories. Empaths don't stay too long because of empathy. They stay because of unconscious loyalty. Loyalty not just to people, but to patterns, identities, and unresolved inner contracts formed long before the relationship began. The empath's psyche is not simply relational. It is symbolic. Meaning, relationships are not just relationships. They are mirrors. They are stages. They are reenactments of something unfinished. And until that unfinished thing is made conscious, the empath will keep staying, long after love has turned into labor. Number 2. The unconscious contract empaths make. Jung believed the psyche organizes itself around complexes, emotionally charged patterns formed early in life. For many empaths, there is a core complex that sounds like this. If I stay present, if I endure, if I love without leaving, then something broken will finally heal. This is not a conscious belief. It is a felt identity. Staying becomes proof of worth. Endurance becomes morality. Leaving feels like failure. So when the relationship starts to hurt, the empath doesn't ask, "Is this healthy?" They ask, "What am I missing? What more should I understand? What part of me needs to be better?" This is not love. It is identification with suffering. And Jung warned that identification is one of the most dangerous psychological traps because it feels meaningful while quietly draining the self. Number 3. The shadow of the empath, what was never allowed. Here is the part rarely discussed. Empaths are not born overly patient. They are trained to be, often in environments where anger was unsafe, needs were inconvenient, sensitivity required self-erasure to maintain connection. So the empath learned early. If I suppress my instincts, I can preserve the bond. That suppressed instinct, anger, refusal, the impulse to leave, doesn't disappear. It becomes shadow. And Jung was clear. What is not lived consciously will be lived unconsciously, often through repetition. So the empath stays not because they don't feel anger, but because they were never taught they were allowed to act on it. If this resonates, pause for a moment. This is not pathology. This is conditioning. And recognition is the first soft release of guilt. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, stay with me. And if this kind of depth resonates, tell us your story in the comments. Number 4. Why familiar pain feels like love. One of Jung's most unsettling insights was this. The psyche seeks familiarity, not happiness. What feels familiar feels safe, even if it hurts. So if early connection required emotional labor, patience, or self-silencing, then adult relationships that require endurance will feel strangely right. Not joyful, not peaceful, but meaningful. This is why empaths often say, "I don't know why I can't leave. Something keeps pulling me back." That something is not weakness. It is an unresolved pattern seeking completion. The psyche believes, if I can stay long enough this time, maybe the ending will change. But Jung taught that repetition does not resolve a pattern. Consciousness does. Number 5. The narcissistic dynamic as a psychological stage. This is where narcissistic dynamics become relevant, but not in a blaming way. The narcissistic structure often externalizes what the empath internalized. Where the empath doubts, the narcissist asserts. Where the empath adapts, the narcissist demands. Where the empath feels, the narcissist performs. This creates a psychic loop, not because the narcissist is chosen, but because the dynamic activates the empath's deepest unconscious material. The empath believes they are trying to save the relationship. What they are actually trying to save is a younger version of themselves. And until that inner figure is seen, honored, and integrated, the empath stays. Number 6. Guilt, the invisible chain. Empaths often believe guilt is a moral compass. Jung saw it differently. Unexamined guilt is often misplaced responsibility. Empaths feel guilty for leaving someone who is struggling, prioritizing their own peace, not being understanding enough. But guilt here is not ethical. It is psychological. It comes from a deep identification with being the emotional stabilizer. So staying feels like goodness. Leaving feels like betrayal, even when staying is costing the self. If you've ever felt more guilt imagining leaving than imagining enduring more pain, that is not love. That is conditioning asking to be questioned. Number 7. The body knew before the mind. Here is something Jung respected deeply. The body is the unconscious made visible. Empaths often say, "I was exhausted all the time. I felt numb but couldn't explain why. My intuition was screaming, but I ignored it." The body speaks when the psyche is overwhelmed. Staying too long is rarely a mental decision. It is a delay in trusting embodied truth. Jung believed individuation begins when we stop overriding inner signals in order to preserve external bonds. If your body started shutting down before you left, it was not weakness. It was intelligence. Number 8. The moment awareness begins and why it hurts. The most painful phase is not staying. It is seeing and still staying. This is where shame often enters. I knew, and I still didn't leave. Jung would say this stage is necessary. Awareness always arrives before integration. The psyche needs time to reorganize. Old identities must loosen. New authority must form. This is not delay. It is gestation. And judging yourself during this phase only prolongs it. If this part feels raw, gently remind yourself, you didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because your psyche was learning something essential. Number 9. Individuation, the end of staying too long. Individuation for Jung is not becoming better. It is becoming whole. And wholeness includes the right to leave without explanation, the right to disappoint others, the right to choose peace over potential. The empath who individuates does not become cold. They become selective. They no longer confuse endurance with depth. They no longer confuse familiarity with love. They listen to their body. They trust first signals. They leave earlier, not because they care less, but because they care more about reality. Number 10. The quiet shift that changes everything. The most important moment is not the exit. It is the internal withdrawal. When the empath stops negotiating with their own knowing. When they stop explaining red flags away. When compassion no longer overrides self-respect. This shift is quiet, but it reorganizes the psyche. And after it happens, the empath doesn't ask, "Why do I stay too long?" Because the answer has dissolved. They no longer stay where the self must disappear to survive. Finally, the truth that sets you free. Empaths stay too long not because they are broken, but because they were trained to value connection over selfhood. Jung believed the goal of healing was not detachment, but integration. When empathy and boundaries coexist, when compassion includes the self, when leaving no longer feels like failure, but alignment. If this video felt like recognition rather than information, it means something in you is already integrating. And that is not the end of empathy. That is the beginning of authority. If this resonated, consider subscribing to the Mind Kit. This space exists for those moments when psychology meets truth, and healing becomes quiet, grounded, and real. You're not late. You're right on time.